All right, gentlemen, it's time for us to get started for this hour. We're thankful once again for you being here. We have an esteemed panel that's going to discuss the topic of the desire for real depth of relationship. Going from left to right, we've got Adam Faughn, who is the preacher at the Central Church of Christ in Paducah, Kentucky. We've got Aaron Baker, who is the pulpit preacher at the Forestdale congregation here in Forestdale, Missouri. It is Forestdale, right? Forestdale, Missouri? Okay, good deal. I wasn't sure if it was a suburb or something of a different kind. Anyway, Matt Stewart from the St. Peter's Church of Christ in St. Peter's here in Missouri, and also Wesley Hazel, who is the preacher at the Valdosta Church of Christ, the Forest Park Church of Christ in Valdosta, Georgia. We're thankful for these guys coming here and talking once again on our topic of real relationships. And in talking about that, I'm just going to ask a couple of questions and let the dialogue proceed, but one of the questions we have with regard to men is, some have said that we're people that are more connected than ever before, but we are lonelier than ever before. Have you found that to be the case with the men that you've talked to? And particularly, we're interested in talking about men of the church.
I think if we were just to pass the microphone around to the whole room, all of us would affirm that statement overall. I think all of us know that it is rare for, I'll broaden it out a little bit, men in our culture, and then more specifically men within the church, to be able to honestly, just candidly say, I have a or a few dear, dear friends. But then we also would say, but I know a whole bunch of people. Some of that is simply because of our interconnected world. Most of you all living in a city, you're around a lot of people all the time. Obviously, social media, the internet, I mean, how many of us have 22 billion Facebook friends, and there's not even 22 billion people in the world, but how many of those people will be actually confide things in? And it is true that we are very, very connected, and that's a good thing. But sometimes, and I'll pass it down after this, and this is going to lead hopefully in some things we say in the next few minutes. Sometimes, because of the level of quote-unquote connection, we never take the time to deepen the connection. And I think most of us understand that we live in a world that is tremendously superficial, and sometimes superficial things are okay. But there's a very different thing between I know someone, I call someone a friend, and someone actually being a friend. And that's where we're going to be going the next several minutes.
Okay, thank you for the question. Who has a phone with them? Most everybody. Who doesn't have a phone? Maybe that's easier. Most people have a phone. We are connected, right? We are connected. There was a study done in 2011 by Niobe Way. It was called Friendship and the Crisis of Connection, and they interviewed adolescent boys, and they said, how connected are you with people? And the majority of those adolescent boys were very connected. They had what they would call deep relationships. And so they tracked these boys as they got older. And when they hit around their late teens, early 20s, these boys that would describe, hey, I have very deep connections and relationships, it flip-flopped. It went from, like the 80-20 rule, 80% said we have deep connections, to now it's 20% had deep connections. And so why did that happen? Some of it is because of how we are. Some of it is cultural pressures around us being men. It's being pushed on us. Real men don't cry. I'm sure there's other topics we'll get into later, but how you define men is you keep things close to the vest. You don't share emotion. And so it was interesting to kind of do some study on that and how they tracked these young men who said, yeah, we have deep relationships. Why did that change into your late teens, early 20s? Some of it has to do with, us as men, how we develop, how we change, and we find it harder to make, male friends that are deep relationships as we get older, rather than just having a lot of people that we connect with on a superficial level.
I might be a little bit different approach when it comes to answering this question, and that is this. How deep is deep when it comes to a relationship? Because my perception of a deep relationship may be different than your perception of how deep can be or should be. When I look around just in our presence here, I've known many of you in this area for many years, but I've probably talked to you a handful of times. But you know what makes my understanding and perception of deep connection is that we have that love of Christ and that we're going to be in heaven together. That's the goal. So when we see one another and when we encourage one another, when we hug each other, and we tell each other we're going to be praying for one another, that's deep to me. That's perception of deepness of a relationship. Because I know that my brethren aren't going to say things that they don't mean, and we shouldn't. And if we mean what we say, that I'm praying for you, brother, even if I only see you one time, to me, that's a deep relationship. I know maybe somebody else may look at it different. I may need to know everything about you to make it a deep relationship. Sometimes we know too much about each other, and we get too deep. But it is perception, though, sometimes. It is perception on how you are looking at your relationship with your brother, and what is it like? How do you perceive your brother? How does your brother perceive you? When you see each other every week, when you see each other every day, when you see each other once a year. So those relationships can be based upon perception of how you view it, because loneliness, and we'll get to that here in a moment, but loneliness can also be based upon a perception. We can perceive ourselves to be lonely, but we're not really. We've got friends all around us. We're just not taking the opportunity to grow in those friendships. And we'll get into that a little further.
Just my observation about men in general, I read somebody said the greatest miracle in Jesus' life was that he had 12 close friends in his 30s. That would be a miracle in my life because I don't have 12 close friends. I mean, I have lots of friends, a level of deepness, but I don't have that many people that I'm really close to. But my observation is I think most men want to have more friends. They want to have more connection, but they have no idea how to bring that about. Mm-hmm. And so we just don't and put our head down and go to work every day.
Yeah. So speaking to that, Jesus with his followers had at least 12 that followed him around on a regular basis, that saw him, in his most intimate moments. What qualities, what characteristics do you find Jesus sharing with his disciples, and likewise that really fostered the depth of relationship that you find between Jesus and men who would shortly be willing to die for him after his resurrection?
Yeah, so for me, and I'll reflect on Jesus and how this goes into my life, of Jesus had a common goal, and he constantly talked about spiritual things. It's kind of like you try to talk to young people about intimacy in your marriage, and maybe your mind goes to sex immediately, but you try to make this point that no, if you want real intimacy, you begin to share your spiritual life, you begin to pray together, you begin to explore those things together, and then that'll lead into everything else. But I think in regards with other men, have spiritual conversations. Talk about your spiritual life and that level of vulnerability. And this is kind of hard because I think while I preach to people, right? They hear me talking about that all the time, but just sitting at lunch and us talking about, hey, how's your spiritual life going? And it can really be uneasy for a few moments, but when you've engaged in conversations like that, you create bonds. And I think that's what Jesus was doing with his disciples over and over. And we would do well to instigate those conversations, and we would do well to be receptive to those conversations.
Yeah, men, we can't be afraid to be vulnerable. We can't be afraid to express. We can't be afraid to share with each other what we're going through. I think about right before Jesus went to the cross, he was surrounded by those close friends. And they all said, specifically, Peter, as he stood and he said, I'll never forsake you. Sometimes we have friends like that even today that we think, well, they'll never change how they view me, or I'll never change how I view them. But problems happen in life, don't they? Circumstances come about that can challenge us. But as Christians, even though we may not have a close relationship that remains with one particular person or a group of people, it's our perception, again, of understanding that deepness lies within our commonality, who we are. And we can't forget that as we share, these are things that happened to me. And we got to be able to trust one another that we'll listen, we'll give advice and counsel, and to be able to help each other recognize that as Jesus, remember, looked back at Peter after he denied him. Sometimes that look from our brother can make a big difference. But yet I also think about when Peter gave that counsel to Christians in 1 Peter chapter 4. He said, be serious and watchful. We got to be serious about our relationships. Do we really want to have a relationship with one another as the church? Do we really want to have a relationship with people to help one another get to heaven? Isn't that the goal? And so how should that relationship be cultivated to get to heaven? I can't have that relationship to help you get to heaven if I'm not around you, if I'm not speaking to you, if I'm not sharing with you. I've got to be willing to do that.
You want me to continue with that one?
You can if you'd like to.
Okay. You've probably seen the video. Kid rides by on a bike, yells at the kid standing in the yard, do you want to be friends? Kid says, sure. Turns around, Mom, I've got a new friend, bye, and runs off to play. How easy is it for us to make friends? We find it more difficult. Sometimes because when we're in school, you're around people of your same age and basic background. You grew up in school, you have the same teacher, you're at the same school, you already have a lot of things in common built in. When we graduate high school, we move off to college, you get a job. Maybe your job is you're working with people that are 10 years older than you, 20 years older, and you suddenly find, I don't have as much in common with these people as I do from where I came from, being in college or high school or whatever. And so it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to make friends. And a lot of it is, as Matt mentioned, we have to work at it, we have to try, and if we will, there are blessings and benefits to having deep friendships. Look at what Jesus did and accomplished. But he also put work into his apostles' hands to say, okay, I'm going to go somewhere else, but here's the work I'm putting into your hands, and you need to do this work. And so they needed to depend upon each other. So Jesus had to take time to build those relationships so that these men were confident in what they were taught, in who Jesus was, and what work was in their hands, so that they could then move forward. And so it is hard to make friends, but there are great blessings to it.
I agree with everything that's been said. Let me put one spin on it. When you read the fourth account of the gospel, John's gospel, what does John call himself in that gospel?
Disciple Jesus.
The disciple whom Jesus loved. And you think about the interactions Jesus had with all the apostles, but maybe John specifically, that could lead him to say such a thing. Of course, we often talk about this idea of Jesus being a rabbi, correctly so, and rabbis, their disciples were with them constantly. They didn't just show up in Sunday school and listen for 30 minutes. They walked with them every day. They saw them eat. They saw them interact with people. They saw them, get their tents ready for night. They saw everything. They saw the whole life. But you think specifically about some of the times that Jesus and John and maybe a handful of others, what he saw and what he interacted with Jesus with. I mean, who was there at the Mount of Transfiguration when Jesus is talking with Moses and Elijah about the fact that he's going to die, about his exodus? John saw that. Whether he fully understood what was going on or not, he saw that. Who was a stone's throw away when Jesus said, "My heart is sorrowful even unto death"? I'm not sure in my life, other than my wife, I've got anyone I would tell that to. I'll just be honest with you. But that's a level of friendship where you have walked with someone so much, you've eaten with them, you've done whatever with them, but everything that's on your heart, down to things that I'm afraid I'm about to die, you're not afraid to share those things with that individual. And it's no wonder then that John would reflect back on that and say, he loved me. I was his best friend. And that's a beautiful reminder of what it truly means to have that friendship. And Jesus modeled even that through his life.
I love the fact that as you're looking at Jesus and his life, and particularly his interactions with his apostles, that you see the relationship, because they knew more than anything else that he absolutely loved them. When he had to stand in Matthew 16 and tell Peter, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah," and then 2 verses later, "Get behind me, Satan," or the disappointment in the garden, as Adam mentioned just a moment ago. I mean, there was the understanding that he absolutely loved them, and they were not afraid to be who they were around them. Sometimes we put up false fronts, sometimes we put up barriers. What kind of barriers do you see getting in the way of a 21st century man wanting to have a deeper relationship with those around him, particularly of Christians that sometimes stand in the way of those things?
Some of it's already been mentioned. In fact, Wes mentioned this in his lesson this morning, the rugged individualism. And some of that's cultural. We all understand that. We are told in our culture that you stand on your own 2 feet, you get your own way, and that maybe that's too strong of a word, that very strongly discourages true friendship, because true friendship also means I'm going to help you. In fact, I want to help you, not just what can I get from you. And what also discourages deep friendship, even among Christians, is sometimes we are so utterly busy that we frankly don't have or take the time to develop. Friendship takes a long time. Friendship is far deeper than just having a buddy. I'm not making fun of that word at all. I'm really not. That's a good thing. If you've got a hunting buddy or a fishing buddy or a softball playing buddy. Three guys on the stage played softball together in college and won a title. You want your T-shirt? That's right. Sorry. But it's far deeper, and those things are great if you've got a buddy to do those things with. Friendship takes a ton more time than just an activity you do together, because it means you have done more than just that activity together. And the world in which we live, we are pulled in so many, not all wrong or bad directions. We just don't make or take the time to say, I truly love this man. I truly love this person. And I want to develop this relationship to where he really is a friend. We live in a culture that discourages that. And we bleed right into it. By just allowing ourselves to be pulled in so many different directions, we don't make or take the time to do that.
Yeah, appreciate those thoughts. Take this the right way, but the church reflects the culture. What I mean by that is, think about the culture of the world we live in. We've got broken homes and broken families. So as you reach out and you evangelize, what are you going to come across? People that grow up in broken homes and broken families. And so the people at our congregations where we're at will probably reflect that, in that you're going to have people that you're working with that are from broken families. Okay? My parents were divorced when I was about 6 months old. My mom remarried and divorced, married again. So when we're reaching out to people and we're trying to talk to them about Jesus, we're trying to talk to them about a man that we can trust, it can be difficult, can't it? We're trying to teach people about our Heavenly Father when they don't know who their Father was. It can create issues. My point is, there are a lot of things that work against us in trying to develop real, strong, manly bonds. And yet they're so biblical. You think about David and Jonathan and the bond that they shared. A lot of it was because, first of all, they were in close proximity. They both lived for a period of time there in the king's household. They both rejoiced when David killed Goliath. They both tried to be speared by Saul to the wall in 1 Samuel chapter 20. And so a lot of the things that we can do to have deep relationships is to spend time to realize I do need this in my life. It is beneficial for me, and I'm willing to put in the effort to have a friend like that in my life.
We're talking about barriers. It's easy to look at barriers that get in the way with relationships with those in the world. But what about in the church? I think one of the biggest barriers that exists in the church for men is that what if we have to confront our brother like Paul did to Peter? How we confront one another is going to make a difference. And sometimes we choose not to because we don't want that confrontation. And we think that it's going to hurt our friendship. And it might. It might for a time. But I'm always encouraged, even when the argument between John Mark, became so heated that Paul and forgive me, Barnabas, thank you, son of encouragement. Paul, they had to separate ways for a time, but yet we see them coming back together and seeking that encouragement. That John Mark, he was so upset with the situation, that I look at Peter and Paul. I know I'm jumping here. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to get those both examples. That you look at Peter and Paul. Then Peter later on in 2 Peter refers to Paul as his beloved brother. Church, God calls us, men, God calls us to be able to handle situations and not affect our relationship with one another. If we handle them the right way, we can overcome the challenges that exist. It may take some time, but it's on how we want to overcome it, how we want to get through it, so we don't cause the barrier based upon our emotion, based upon our feelings, based upon our own thoughts, but we helped to knock down that barrier to keep that friendship. And sometimes, think about when you were young, men. Did you ever get in a fight with your friend? And 2 minutes later, you're slapping hands again and playing ball again. That ever happen? In a lot of ways, men in the church, we got to be the same way. Sometimes we got to talk about things that are going to be serious. Sometimes we got to talk about things that are going to be challenging. But we can't let it affect us to where it tears the church apart. Don't let that be a barrier. Let it be a stepping stone for a deeper relationship and a further relationship.
Well, there's probably a lot of barriers. I just speak personally. I'm just busy. I don't have time. And I feel that way. I feel like about my marriage and my children, let alone having a man friend. It's like, and they're going to come after that, right? So I have all of these things that are going on, and so there has to be some level of intentionality behind those things, and to not settle for a superficial relationship. And then, I think we downplay the idea of close bonds with other men. Even like you read. People start talking about David and Jonathan. People all they call that a homosexual relationship. It's not. That's crazy. But that's where people are like, well, if you're too close to this guy, it's like, I'm quite possibly the manliest man in the entire world. And that was a Ray Stevens joke if you didn't get it. But anyways, but to understand of like, I don't want that perception. But it's going to take some work to get there. And I think sometimes we're fearful of those things. If we're too close, if we're too... I've seen about this a lot with preachers and their relationship with churches, and this goes in with all of our relationships. But I had a buddy of mine once say, and he was a good friend, but he said, well, preachers come, preachers go. Oh, no, that's not right at all. Right? And so that's not the biblical model. And then I got to think, what is the biblical model? Well, in Acts 20, when Paul was with those men who were elders in the church at Ephesus, they cried together. The fact that we're not going to see each other, it's not like, whatever. We get another preacher. There'll be other elders along the way. Well, maybe there will be, but that bond, that intensity, that it didn't come out of nowhere, right? That we can have intimacy in those sorts of relationships. But we're going to have to be intentional about it, because just all of our time gets filled. So I was thinking, I have some friends. We don't all live together. Live together, that sounds weird. We don't all live in the same place, which makes it even more difficult. But I drove up, and I was going to a speaking thing, and I saw some friends that I hadn't seen in years. And I just remember when I got done, we just spent the night. We just hung out. We didn't do anything, especially when I left the next day, and I thought, I'm so glad I did that. Now, when I was driving there, I was thinking, I don't have time for this. I got 15 other things I ought to be doing right now. But I'm so glad that I did it. And I think we need more moments like that where we need to realize, I'll be glad that I did this. And we do that with our wives, because they're even busier than we are. But we encourage them to do things, right? Because we know it will be good for them. My wife couldn't be here this weekend because she's at a ladies' retreat with our congregation, and it's good for her to go. I want her to go. Does it cost money? Yes. Does it take time? Yes. Am I by myself? Yes. All those things, but it's good for her. And I think realizing some of the same thing that we get with our family is also true with us. It's good for us to spend some time with brothers in Christ.
Appreciate that. Matt, I'm going to direct the next question to you just because of something you said. You mentioned that sometimes it takes real courage and difficulty in talking about some of those things that are more difficult to talk about. Do you feel like my wife gets upset whenever I tell her the check engine light's on, and oh, it's fine, going down the road and just realizing that there's dangers and there's things that need to be taken care of. Do you feel like that with regard to men in particular, there are things that we feel like we can't talk about, but we absolutely should be talking about? Does that make sense? And how do we open up the door for being able to be more vulnerable with some of those topics?
Okay. Before I answer that question, my wife's never been upset with me.
Good. That's awesome.
No. Completely joking. Yeah. The things that we can do. Now, one of the things I think about is important, men. Communication with one another is more important than just being next to one another. When we come together to worship, we're here together and we're worshiping together. So it's collective, and I, for lack of a better phrase, feel close to you when we worship together. I like that feeling. But it's not enough. I like to be able to then converse. I like to be able to then to talk. And then as you talk to one another, you start to listen to what each other are saying. And then you may hear things that kind of red flag for a moment. Maybe it's a doctrinal position. Maybe it's something that you didn't know. Your brother believed a certain thing. What do you do with that? If in our experience, I think a lot of times what we've dealt with as preachers when we preach the congregations of the Lord's people, we always say the first, don't go to someone else and tell them. If you have an issue with what your brother has said, or you go to your brother, go to them first. Now they haven't offended you, but it's something that you need to talk about. Sometimes one of the questions that the ladies are dealing with, and as my wife and I were working through these together and talking about them together, are ways to help your sister, but there's ways to help your brother. And we have to take that time to be able to say, have that moment that your brother doesn't feel like they're being put on the spot, like you just got cornered. And all of a sudden now, I've got to answer in such a way because I'm in the hot seat now. We shouldn't make each other feel that way. It's not like going to the principal's office, when we're dealing with our brothers and we're dealing with our friends. They should know that we're talking to them as a friend, as a brother, as someone with concern of the righteousness that we need to be all following together. But again, remember when Jesus said, with what measure you judge, it will be measured back to you. And how we approach one another, we always have to remember to do unto others as we would want them to do unto you. We have to approach it in a way that our brother is going to receive, be receptive. But then, of course, you have the what if he's not? How do we handle? Well, we keep working, brethren. We keep working towards it. We keep contacting. We keep discussing. But you have to look at different strategies. When to come together. When to add somebody else in the conversation. When to let go of the conversation. When is the time just to kind of back off for a moment? To be able to remember that sometimes we can feel hounded. Sometimes we can feel like, why is he picking on me? There's so many other brothers in here that have issues. Why is he always coming to me about my issues? If we perceive, and that goes back to my first comment of perception, if we perceive our brethren always doing that, even if our brother is doing that, even if that's the way we feel, try to change your heart and your approach to say, let me just listen to what he's saying instead of how he's saying it. And that goes back to when I said about my wife and me and our wives. Sometimes we always have this barrier in our conversations. It's not what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. So say it in a way that you would want somebody to say it to you to be productive, to overcome that, if it's whatever issue it may be.
Yeah, it's difficult to talk about certain things, isn't it? Has anybody ever said to you, or have you ever heard, real men don't cry? So if you go to talk to somebody and you're having an emotionally challenged topic and you got some tears in your eyes, you don't want to feel like less of a man. And so it's difficult to talk about your struggles with other people because what are they going to think? Am I going to seem like less of a man? We don't talk about our past because perhaps we'll be judged as less than a man. We don't talk about sex issues because, well, maybe they'll think I'm a pervert. We don't talk about issues of forgiveness because, well, a real man would know better than that and would already have forgiven. And so there are struggles we face in trying to deepen our relationships and things that perhaps we find it hard to talk about, but it's worth it. Proverbs 18 and verse 24, there is a friend that sticks closer than a brother. And so there are great blessings to being willing to be vulnerable, to have the hard discussions, to deepen your relationships, because you're going to have someone in your life that you can go to that is very deep friendship, that someone you can rely upon.
When you're talking about visiting with people about the issues that they're having, and the opening of the closing of doors, I had a friend of mine that said that he went to a preacher one time, and he was dealing with basically the destruction of his marriage, and he went in and talked about something his wife had done. He started breaking down, and the preacher said, "Oh, come on, don't cry." It was one of those vulnerable moments, and you can be sure that he's going to close that door on that and just automatically assume that that's going to be the reaction from now on. The vulnerability, and especially in times of crises or the times of difficulty, that's absolutely something to deal with regard to the fact that we sometimes foster those shallow, superficial relationships because that's the way we feel. Adam, do you feel like how does that really impact our spiritual growth with regard to being able to walk through and work through struggles with other men?
You led into the question beautifully with that illustration, with that story. Because where it breaks down is not in the normal day-to-day walk. Mm-hmm. Where it breaks down is when there is a crisis, where there is a deep breaking of trust, where there is a very strong thing. The four of us on stage, I know Wes, I met Matt in college a little bit. This guy's a good last name, doesn't he?
He does.
That's
yes.
Yeah. Never met him before, but we could sit here and eat lunch together in a little while. We could tell stories. We could do all kinds of stuff. Again, we've used the word superficial a whole lot, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's where friendships begin. Let's call it like it is, right? You enjoy an activity together. You enjoy a conversation together. That's where it begins. But that stuff's not going to make a difference when my marriage is falling apart. That stuff is not going to make a difference when one of my kids thinks about becoming a prodigal. That stuff's not going to make a difference when my house burns down. That stuff's not going to make a difference when an eldership looks at me and says, "Today's your last day. You got to find somewhere else to go." And if all I've ever connected with people on is who won the game yesterday, or, how big was the fish you caught yesterday? I know you're not going to tell me the truth anyway, but how big was it, right? That's fine. But it breaks down when you have no one to go to because all you've ever talked about is just who won yesterday. But if you've opened the door, to use that illustration, maybe it has never been a crisis yet, but there have been conversations that were about deeper things. Matt mentioned spiritual conversations. I thought he did a great job with that a few minutes ago. About just mentioning just spiritual things along the way. If I know I can trust you with the fact that, I had a problem with my wife last week. Can we pray about that? If I know I can trust you with even that little bit more level, then when there is a destruction in my life, a crisis in my life, guess who I'm going to? I'm going to my friend. And I'm going to someone who's walked with me through sort of mini valleys, because now I'm in the deepest valley. And I know I've got someone I can trust to where I can say, yeah, that's what I was looking at on the internet. And I need somebody to pray with me about it. Or, yeah, this really is my fault that my kids don't believe in God, or at least it's partially my fault. And I need somebody to walk with me through that. But if all we've ever talked about is hunting, fishing, and baseball, we will never have that level of friendship.
Yeah, I think excellent points. Would you like to run a race with crutches? Really what we're doing by not reaching out and sharing our lives with the men around us is we're saying, I want to take on the challenges of life. I want to run this race of life, but I don't want any help. I've got these crutches, these things I'm dealing with, this backpack that weighs 1,000,000 pounds, but I'm going to carry it alone. Galatians chapter 6, verse 1 and verse 4, bear one another's burdens. And so it may be uncomfortable, it may be hard, it may be difficult to open up, but we have to be willing to be vulnerable, to reach out to those we see in trouble, and when we face trouble, to make sure that we can go to men and say, I'm having difficulties. Can you pray with me? Can you pray for me? This burden is really heavy. Can you help me bear it? You know, that's where Satan strikes. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8 is when he's like a roaring lion seeking whom he might devour, and we're on the outskirts. You know, the lion is going to look for the weakest, the loneliest. And so we as men, we cannot fall into that temptation, that trap. We need others in our lives. That's the way God has designed us.
I just think a lot of it is finding room for spiritual conversations, which is not something just unique to men's relationships, but it's about all of our relationships. Even husbands and wives and our children and people at church, they can tend to be very superficial. So I just come back to beat that drum of we have to intentionally talk about these things. And one way, is I probably don't instigate the conversation very well when I say, hey, man, I'd like to get there and talk to you about your problems. And if we could get together this afternoon and do that, you looking forward to that? Okay, you probably pass, right? But sometimes we set it up, especially preachers are bad about setting it up that way. That one tool that can be real effective in those conversations is, and honestly, I won't do this with everyone, but I try to do this on a pretty regular basis, is just, I'll go to lunch with somebody and I'll ask them the question, what do you see that I don't see? And what I'm trying to do is give them permission to speak into my life beyond about how great the Dallas Cowboys are, okay? I want them, not much beyond that, but a little bit beyond, right? I want you to know if there's something that you've been, man, I wish I had an opportunity to tell Adam about his purple suit down there, but I just can't quite come to the place to do it. No, it's okay. I'm open to it. And when I open myself, then all of a sudden, that's when other people open themselves to you. And so I think making ourselves vulnerable, Paul would talks about, when he's talking about himself and Apollos and God giving the increase, he says, but I have figuratively applied these things to ourselves for your benefit, because it's dangerous to open yourself up, right? When use yourself as an example too often and see what happens. People are going to talk about this is going to be bad, but he said, but I know the risk, but I'm doing it for your sake. Yeah. So open yourself up and then instigate the things that people are talking about. Yeah. I have a few friends that, I think we can talk openly about porn. Okay, this is a shocking word, but everybody's struggling with it. Best I can tell, right? You have these every man's battle. We know what that book's about without having to know what that book's about. And is there someone I can talk to? And that doesn't mean I got to unpack everything in the world every time I have a conversation. But where you can get to that point of, I've got a couple friends, and I just say, hey, how you doing with that? And they know what I'm talking about because we've talked about it before. And that accountability and that intimacy helps them and it helps me, because neither one of us want to be sinful. We both want to be righteous, but we're not always righteous. And so when you have those, we're in this together, like that. You ever watch those? Watch it with a filter, but the Band of Brothers. Mm-hmm. But the Easy Company and World War II, and they fight in the European theater, and it's like everybody wants to be a part of that, right? We're brothers. My son was on the football team, and they had, their shirt said brotherhood. And what they were trying to say is, we're in this together, we've got strengths and weaknesses and hard times and good times, but we're in this together. Everybody wants that. So much so that the world tries to take it, tries to co-opt it. But the truth is, the brotherhood ought to start right here in the brotherhood. If we'll get out of the way and just allow ourselves to be spiritually minded people.
It takes practice.
Yes.
It absolutely takes practice. I used to be the worst at doing hospital visits, just because you get there and you realize somebody's about to go through a procedure or has just had a procedure, and it's life-changing, and you're standing there going, how's the food, or are they taking good care of you? But one of the things that I've come to realize is that there's a couple of intentional questions that you can just ask that person. How are you feeling? And what are you praying about? That gives me a great insight in helping that person to be able to cope with those things, and also gives me a direction to be able to pray with them. But because they've had to consider what I've been praying for and openly share that with you, it gives them an opportunity to be able to be vulnerable, and hopefully deepens the relationship and realizes that here's not just a person that's just coming and saying, how's the food, here's the flour, let me shake your hand and I'm going to go. But I'm really interested in your spiritual position and where you are, and that doesn't happen by accident.
And it was so like we talk about conversation starters, icebreakers,
Yeah.
right? But what those are, they're just little phrases, just like what you said, and even what do you see is what I said earlier. But you just kind of say it and throw it out there. You don't know where that's going to lead, but it almost always leads somewhere deeper.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
So you're just trying to. It's an opener. So put the line in your pocket and use it.
That's right. One last question. This is actually one from one of our shepherds here. That's actually the last question, leads into the last question that's on your list that I gave you. One of the blessings of being a shepherd is dealing with the difficult and deep circumstances together with a group of men. It builds a close relationship among the elders with one another and with the members. We meet regularly and deal with difficult and challenging circumstances that require us to open our hearts and share our thoughts and feelings. When you meet with a member like that who's going through a difficult spiritual time change or difficulty in relationship, it deepens that relationship by them having to be vulnerable with the elders. That is, when somebody bears their soul to you, it changes the relationship. How do we encourage those type of relationships within a local church, particularly men in our congregation?
Intentionally spend time with them, and then intentionally talk about spiritual things. And somebody doesn't have to be getting divorced to have a spiritual conversation.
That's right.
Right? But if you just do that on the regular, and you can't do everybody at the same time, right? But I'm just saying, if you're saying I'm going to have a deep conversation about spiritual things once a week with someone else, it's amazing the impact that'll have.
Yeah.
Sometimes our congregations, especially, and this isn't to be negative, but elderships can be more of a business-keeping practice than a spiritual leading endeavor.
That's right.
We can be too focused upon even just the numbers in the building and not who's in the building, who's coming together. We can be too focused on making sure that everything is paid for instead of making sure that they know that salvation has been paid for through the blood of Christ. And so the elders have to be intentional. That word has been used multiple times here, but intentional to focus mainly and solely on the spiritual matters of the church. And too often, I see a lot of heads shaking here, too often elderships get focused on the business practices of the congregation. Elders have to know their flock. They have to know what's going on. Because too many times elders are reacting instead of being proactive. They're reacting to things that happen all of a sudden. Well, I didn't know that person was going through that. How did you not know that person's not going through that? And why did you not know? And that's where eldership's, that shepherding aspect is the sheep. And this wasn't with sheep, but we were some friends in the southwestern part of Missouri, and I didn't know this happened. I'm not a farmer. I'm not a country boy. I like to be in mind. I like that atmosphere, but I'm just not. I grew up in St. Louis area of Missouri, But I went out with him to go feed the cows, and I couldn't see him anywhere. And I had no idea. He called the cows in. The cows. Did you all know that? You can call cows and they come, and they knew exactly where he was. They were hiding over far away. I couldn't even see them. And yet all of a sudden I hear all this mooing and all this movement, and they're coming right at me, and they're coming right at me with force. What I'm trying to get at is that they knew his voice. And all he had to do is holler out one time. They knew it. Right? It's kind of like a child that knows his or her parents' voice. You know, when that name is hollered out from mom or dad, they pay attention, they perk up, they see. Same thing as we as the church, we need to be hearing the voices of our elders and to know that they are there for us, for our spiritual needs, for our home needs, but to be able to prepare us for those challenges that will come, so that we'll be ready to face them a little bit better than having to react to them and trying to figure out what to do now. We should be prepared for that, and that's what our elders should be doing.
Appreciate that. Matthew 5:21-24 reminds us that how we feel about our brothers can affect our worship. It can affect our spirituality. So if I have a problem with a brother, I need to go settle it even before worship, right? Because it can really affect us. And James 5:16, pray for one another, confess your sins to one another. One of the things we can do is have a deeper prayer life with a brother. When's the last time you went to another male, not in your immediate family, and said, will you pray with me? And then had a deep prayer, not just guide, guard, and protect us. You have to get rid of those. But we have to deepen our prayer life. We have to share things that maybe sins that we're dealing with. We have to move by choice to a deeper relationship. You know, there are ladies' retreats all the time, aren't there? When's the last time you went to a men's retreat? So maybe there are things we can do as congregations to encourage one another, to make it intentional that we deepen the spiritual bonds that are around us. We need to have meaningful conversations. And so, you know, I point my finger right at myself. I need to do a better job of getting out of the superficial and what's easy and comfortable to moving to more deeper, connective conversations. And I think we all struggle with that, don't we? I think we as men tend to compartmentalize. You know, there's a book, Women Are Like Spaghetti, Men Are Like Waffles. We compartmentalize. You know, this is my relationship with this person, it's going to stay there. Unless we make it a choice to deepen that relationship. And so we have to work on these things. Another thing I would mention is Titus 2, older men mentoring the younger. Sometimes our older members think, well, I'm not worth much, I can't do much, but your level of experience and knowledge is far beyond what I have.
That's right.
When my kids were younger, I wanted advice. Now I seek it out. I'm hopefully a little wiser. Hey, how do you deal with this? What advice do you have with this? And so let's remember that there's a place for everybody. We all have things that we can add, and if you're older, look for ones that look like they're struggling, that might need some help, and go to them. How are you doing? How can I help you? And so this is just about us caring about each other, wanting to see each other in heaven, and wanting to help each other along the path of life.
I appreciate the way the question was worded. How can shepherds, how can elders foster this? Because for one thing, whoever wrote the question, let me say, that itself shows a shepherding heart. The shepherds want to help men have these kind of conversations, these kind of relationships. So trying to sort of directly answer that question, let me give a couple suggestions. One is, as carefully as possible, publicly model it. Here's what I mean. You obviously can't get up as an eldership or an individual elder representing their eldership on a Sunday morning and say, we met with brother and sister so-and-so and their marriage is falling apart. You can't do that. But what would be wrong with an eldership maybe once a month saying, over the course of the last 4 weeks, we as shepherds have met with 5 different families and 3 individuals about spiritual needs, and the conversations have been very helpful. Mm-hmm. You're not sharing any confidential information, but you're modeling the fact that it's not just a business. We have been in their homes, or they've met us at the church building, or we went out to eat together, and we had 9 different conversations this week, or whatever it happens to be. But even more directly to the question, there are times, obviously, where just the elders or just some of the elders need to have those meetings, especially about very, very private things. There are also times where the elders need to bring another man along and say, this is how it's done. That's not just training him to be an elder or a deacon in the future. That's showing him how to have spiritual conversations.
That's right.
We are sitting here across this kitchen table with this brother in Christ or this couple, and we're going to pray with them. We're going to listen to them. We want you to see just not quote unquote how we do it, but that this can be done. And that brother needs to be told, by the way, somewhere in this conversation, something may come up. We need to ask you to leave the room because we're the shepherd. And that's if he has any level of spiritual maturity, he'll understand that. But he's seeing you model a level of depth that he may have never seen before in his life. And that will give him more encouragement, maybe be an elder one day, but even if not, to say, if they can sit across a kitchen table and talk about this with just brother and sister so-and-so, I can do that with my friend. I can have those same kind of conversations with somebody I already greatly appreciate. And so by modeling it and intentionally bringing people into some of those parts of those conversations, you are showing how these deeper conversations